This is People and Their Poems, a podcast about the poems that make a difference in our world. In each episode, writer and educator Sandy Carlson talks with a person who has been influenced by poetry and become a poet or a supporter of this literary form. Stay tuned.
Welcome to People and Their Poems podcast, a podcast about the poems that matter to ordinary people. I'm here today with Sarah Marze. She is a composer, a conductor, and a vocalist, as well as a senior at the University of Connecticut. Welcome, Sarah.
Hi, Sandy. Thanks for having me on the podcast.
Oh, it's a real pleasure. I learned of you through Pat Mottola, president of the Connecticut Poetry Society, when she put a call out last year looking for people to share poems with you for a special project you were working with called Art Song. And I was happy to send in a poem and see what happened. I didn't know what Art Song was, but I was just eager to take the ride and learn, and I learned plenty. Would you share with our listeners what Art Song is about?
Yeah, so Art Song is poetry or previously written texts set to music. Art Song sort of started in the classical music era, but there's some of what we might call Art Song in the Baroque era as well. But I think generally like late 1700s, that's what you can sort of think of when Art Song really picks up. It's an art form usually for one classical solo singer in the Western tradition with an accompaniment like piano or string quartet or sometimes even guitar. So it's like a freestanding work, normally not within like a greater opera or oratorio, which is like an opera but without staging. And they can be collected into song cycles, which do tell a greater narrative story. Normally those don't have staging, so it's meant for a recital or recording purpose, just for the joy of music and poetry itself.
That's a great description of Art Song that's so really helpful to understand what that's about. And it actually makes me think of the poetry of that era where it emerged from, where poems, I think, exhibited more structure and a greater sense of the musicality of language.
Yes.
And a lot of contemporary music contemporary poetry necessarily does. I think more contemporary poetry tends to allow emotion to dominate the landscape of the text. So what's it like to choose contemporary poetry to suit your purposes for Art Song?
So if we sort of think about like the golden age of Art Song, which is like Schubert and Schumann, so that's sort of like sometimes classical, sometimes romantic, more romantic. They often set the works of Goethe. So when we think about Goethe, we think about like traditional sort of rhyme scheme, traditional meter, normally some sort of I am scheme happening, very strophic, so that the text settings themselves typically reflect that. So if you look at Schumann or Schubert songs, it's the same music for each verse. I think what modern composers have tended to do is stray away from poems with a typical strophic or verse structure. We tend to do things that are more free form and allow the music to develop more organically rather than saying, okay, this is what one verse is. I'm going to have an intro and a outro, and you'll just repeat the music on the inside. I think we tend to think about it more through composed. So from start to end, the structure might be a little bit nebulous, and that reflects the poetry. So I sort of fall into that modern composing element. So a lot of my music is dictated by the structure of the poetry. So if it's in verse form, I might have some verse elements and might have some strophic structure to the music. But if the poem is more stream of consciousness, which is something that I love to set to music, the music will sound stream of consciousness. I like the music to sound improvised.
Gotcha. Can you tell us a little bit about the singers that you create your Art Song music for?
I do sing a lot of my own art song. So I write a lot for myself. I'm a soprano, so it means I have a higher female voice. I'm also a coloratura soprano, which is a distinction that means that I can sing very high and very fast, which is not all singers. So I have to often tampen down the range of what I've written to fit more singers than just me and the select few people who love, popping out high notes left and right. Not everyone loves that, and not everyone likes to listen to that, so that's perfectly okay. I've written a lot for the lyric soprano voice. I understand sopranos, so I've written a lot for lyric sopranos, and that's a distinction that means sopranos who are very good at singing long lines. They can also sing very high, but they have a stronger sort of middle bit of their voice. I would say they're more like whereas my voice is more like a flute, maybe their voice might be more like a viola.
Got it.
Or a violin, if that makes sense. They can sustain very well. So the poetry that I pick often has to reflect that. So things that are very wordy tend to not sound great in a very lyric voice because they're trained to be able to do very long lines, and sometimes the text can get lost. So if things are too syllabic, if the phrase lengths are too long, then the soprano just will not really sound good on that text. So that's something I keep in mind.
So you have a lot of considerations that you have to hold in your head while you're looking at a poem and making a determination, could this work or not? Do you hear the song forming as you're reading the poem? Is that part of the process? I'm just curious when a poem lands in front of you as something that you might turn into art song.
Actually, I'm pretty judgy when I look through a book. Like if it doesn't look right on the page, if it's taking up the full width of the page, that automatically gets cut, basically, because that means the phrase lengths are typically too long to be set well to music for what I like to do, unless it's like a really quick patter song, in which case that doesn't really matter. But yeah, I do hear the music usually right away. And if it sings to me, then I'll say, okay, this is the poem I'll be setting to music. But if that doesn't come right away, that's difficult for me to set to music. I think any sort of like auditory cues in the poem, like birds singing, or if the poem itself is called Song to Whatever, that really helps me get in the right mood to write it. But yeah, just based on the rhythm of the words and based on the rhyme and based on the inflection of the voice when you speak the poem out loud, that all influences melody. And I'm hyper tuned to the differences in inflection and rhythm. So it just because I've set a lot of things to music, I can hear it right away at this point.
Could you just speak to us a little bit about your art song project that you completed earlier in the fall, right? It was November.
Right.
Tell us a little bit about that project and its purpose.
Yeah, so Let Us Sing Contemporary Art Songs for Young Singers is an open source and free to use songbook for singers about like high school age or college age. So this is students of classical voice, who might be getting their first art song assignment from their teacher, all the way up to like more experienced, like lower college age students. There's not a lot of modern art song repertoire being written for this age group in mind. It's normally quite difficult to perform. Only professionals or like master students or upper level college students can really pull off a lot of this repertoire quite well. There are some exceptions. For example, North Star Publishing has some great publications of songs for younger singers, but I wanted to create something that was free and that was based in Connecticut. So I collaborated with 6 poets, one of them being you, from the Connecticut Poetry Society. I put out a call for poetry and received a lot of poems, and then I picked the poems based off the criteria I've already been talking about, and I set those to music for both low voice and high voice, and 3 ability levels: beginner, intermediate, and advanced. And I created acting worksheets, recordings, professional recordings with myself and another singer and a pianist, and then also piano tracks for the students to practice with. But yeah, we had a live event in November to celebrate the release. And all of this was supported with a university grant called the UConn IDEA Grant. They gave me a really generous research grant to be able to prepare these materials and spend the whole summer composing, and also put on the live event and fund the recording sessions, pay the musicians. So that was really helpful and a great experience.
And it's very exciting and encouraging to hear that something in the arts was generously funded. That doesn't tend to be the trend. So obviously anybody could sing these songs. It's open source. But what's your dream or your hope for this project?
I hope every 2 or 3 years to keep doing this project. So I have multiple editions of music. So by the end of my career, I hope a student can just have a giant stack of these songs and a voice teacher can flip through and help them find one that works for them all in one place. So this will be a multi-decade endeavor for me, something I hope to be doing for a long time. But at this point, I've gotten something like 600 hits on the website. I was looking at the analytics. So people are looking at the music. I'm involved in a lot of voice teacher Facebook groups, so I keep popping the music in there. Some voice teachers at UConn and who also teach at different schools around Connecticut are starting to use the songs with their students. And one of the students who learned my song in the workshop, which was like an editing phase where I involved some actual high school students, she used the song for a competition audition, which I'm very proud of. So it means she really liked the song. So that was nice.
That's really wonderful. And having been at your live event and gotten to know some of the people whose work you also produced, it just has also created a sort of a cross-generational interaction among people and captures very meaningful experiences that are easy to, I guess, feel when you read the poems. And I think my own experience of the poems you chose is because they are in a contemporary idiom. The song is easier to follow for a non-trained pair of ears like mine, and to see where this project goes. It's really delightful. And while we're on the subject of your website, it's sarahmarze.com.
Yep.
We got to make sure that people go there and check it out, because not only is your art song project there, but your other compositions and other pieces of performance that you've posted are just phenomenal. You could live on that website and just be inspired and moved by the music. And I guess I'm curious, where do you find the time to do all of this in addition to being a UConn student? I mean, you have a pretty full plate.
So there's this interview with Stephen King where he's talking with, who's he talking with? He's talking with another writer who's very famous, but I'm confusing two names and I don't want to get it wrong. So he's talking with another famous writer, and this writer asked Stephen King, like, how the bleep do you write so many books? I can only, I get to my desk and it's like mental constipation. I can't write more than one line. So I saw that interview very early on. And what Stephen King does is he sits down every day and tries to write 6 pages. That's worked out pretty well for him. Like,
yeah.
In his career, financially, creatively, he seems to have a good relationship with his work. And, he works like about 3 to 4 hours every day, tries to get 6 pages and get those, pretty good. I know I made a compromise with myself, which is I can find at least 1 hour of composing time working on a project every single day, except maybe on some days on weekends. Normally, like, I'll get into a flow state, so the hour becomes 3 hours, right? But it's got to be at least an hour. And by the end of the week, that means I've gotten a good chunk of music done. Yeah, I can typically write like about 2 minutes of really good music a week, and that adds up.
That definitely does, and it's absolutely unrelated to music, but it reminds me of my mother was a prolific creator, and she loved all kinds of needlework, and she was very, very gifted at it. And it was kind of what she did while she was watching TV, because she had this mindset that you never just sit idle,
Yep.
So a little bit a day, a little bit a night, or a night, one square, another square, and then she would create these phenomenal Afghans or spreads in what seemed like a blink of an eye. And because it was such a source of pleasure for her to do it, it wasn't a strain.
Yeah.
So is it kind of like that? It's just you get there.
Absolutely. I'm glad you brought up like needlepoint, because I'm an avid crocheter. And when I started crocheting, I found it was a really good metaphor for the creative process. I think people think of composition and poetry and all other forms of creation as sort of this mysterious thing. Like, how does it happen? Like, people are like, they think of like the Beethoven model where he's like hunched over a piano and like genius strikes, and then suddenly like the powers of all the gods of creation flow through him. I just think that's entirely unrealistic. I mean, composition, like anything else, like poetry, is a craft. You get better at it, and your first couple pieces are going to be pretty bad. But over time, you get practice at it, and a little bit every day, just like crochet. I might do 1 row of a scarf, but 1 row of a scarf over a month, you got a scarf. And if you were scared to start the scarf, then you wouldn't have a scarf.
Exactly. And I just that it comes down to planning and persistence and diligence and a belief in the value of what you're doing, I suppose must underlie all of that.
Yeah, I've been lucky to work with really great really great performers and wonderful poets, and seeing their reactions to my work makes it all worth it. So I'm always striving for that. The finished product, I would say. I'm results oriented, even though I love the process, just working with other people, getting to the place where I get to work with other people and I'm away from my desk. That's what makes it all worth it.
That's terrific. And, it's interesting. Our little local library, we have every month a new art exhibit, and the artist is present to talk about the work and to visit with the people who are there, and they might be friends or complete strangers or whatever, but those moments of connection and interaction are just electric. And it seems to me it's got to be what it's all about, and I just think of works of literature, compositions. They weren't born of your creativity to go sit on a shelf and hope that somebody discovers them. So whenever there's an opportunity to be face to face with an audience, it's really where it's at. The archive is secondary, and you are a brilliantly talented musician, and I can't wait to see what the future holds for you, because you're just out of the starting box in terms of getting through college, and it's an impressive and amazing body of work. So just going to say your website again. It's sarahmarze.com. Look for that name in the world of music. Thank you so much for joining today, Sarah.
Thanks so much, Sandy. I really appreciate your time and thoughtful questions. Thanks so much.
This has been People and Their Poems, a podcast about the poems that make a difference in our world. Be sure to check the show notes for any special links relating to this episode. If you want to learn more about the podcast, visit peopleandtheirpoems.net. Or if you want to learn more about Sandy and her work, visit sandycarlson.net. Thanks for listening.